Your senses are overwhelmed by the battle around you. The clattering of swords against shields, the whistling of spells hurled through the air, the howls of your enemy as they seem innumerable. But beyond the eve of defeat comes another noise, off in the distance, a mechanical march of a Steelheart cavalry. Artificial life is created as far more of a reflection and realization of the current day and age of your world. It's made to be an experience of whatever is currently going on. While a world is experienced by all living, dead, and undead races, it's clearly possible that the most intimate relationship with the problems of the world would be the life forms that were created for the very purpose of fixing or changing the problem. For the most part, we're going to be focusing on the fact that when does creation generate a shared identity or culture? When can we see the formation of what would eventually become known as Steelhearts? What's their origin within a world? I think it's important, with artificial life stretching out from the groundwork we laid in the last video, what's the inciting incident? There's many problems in the world that different races or species may not be able to address or handle, and then this artificial life is in turn invented in order to deal with those. So I've come up with a few different examples, and as through all Magpie things, if you see something you want to take and use, you're more than welcome to it. I just ask you leave a comment, a like, and maybe hit that subscribe button, because we're still pretty early on into Regenesis Acies, and there's only more good things to come. So, without further ado, maybe there's a problem that man and elf can't fix alone. Maybe there's a arcane radiation that's lethal to organized life forms as they are, that have a penchant for needing flesh surrounding their bodies. Let's say maybe it rots and decays away at the body, chews away from the bones from inside due to its arcane and strange nature. Perhaps your artificial life is created to study and find a cure for such magical radiation. Perhaps in this process, they strike out for independence, and artificial life decides to make its home established in the radiation area to ensure their own safety and freedoms be respected. They might still try and help treat those that have been afflicted with it, but they're self-interested in wanting to keep their own area safe and sacred from those who might try and use and abuse their created existence. You have the possibility that Steelhearts might be created under the evolution of autonomy gained from a single individual, creation point, or head of species, an envoy of further development upon itself. You have this original creation that's made so advanced, so self-autonomous, that it's then able to manufacture and multiply duplicates of itself, extensions of its own will, and thus your artificial race can be bred from there. Frankly, there are numerous reasons. One such is that a lot of invention and innovation occurs in the real world as well as in fantasy, frankly because of violence. This is the reason shared for the identity of the Steelheart, and it is a very common method for artificial life being created. It, in this world, happened because Hell itself warred upon the creation races and the everlasting. Hell had many dead souls, demons and devils. Fiends were aplenty. The creation races increased their own numbers, and the Steelhearts were forward. Now, you may be asking, in instances of such great war, who creates these individuals and where? Currently, it's a great debate amongst the scholars in the world, as the War of Hell is still a fairly modern and recent event in the world. There are different opinions and outspoken creators who all assure they're the first ones to have created it. You'd have the worshippers of the god of innovation, invention, and artifice, Technician, members of the church who profess that they were gifted with the miracle of life itself. It was their hands that bound the souls to the machine and gave us the premier fighting soldier able to beat back the armies of hell. Next, you would have a man whose life was changed by tragedy, a genius caught up in a magical incident that his body was left damaged beyond traditional healing and repair. He began to replace his damaged and lost parts with artificial parts. He one day recognized he might be able to make something more. He's quoted in the history books as saying, "I know it's the work of the gods to create life, but I just thought I could do it better." Of course, perhaps, it was the great businessman, the man of many life-changing inventions, who had already begun to establish automated processes, affordable and accessible replications of systems and inventions, whether printing presses, assembly lines, general access to the arcane electricity and lighting. Perhaps it was this man who gave us the industrialized soldier, the printing press patriot who defended the world from the incursion of hell. Now, there are your three leading answers. What's the right answer, though? Maybe all three. Maybe none of them. Maybe someone else. You can dilute them down to divine origins, a genius inventor, or an innovative industrialist. There are plenty of options out there as to where your steel hearts can come from. I'm just here to be the bird that gives you the ideas. Again, I give you no definitive answer in this video because it is still something that's very alive and up for debate in my world. Small storytelling advice: you never have to commit to a direct answer for any problem. Any, in fact, in history. You can change your mind about something. These are worlds you get to create. Now, don't just constantly contradict yourself and make a liar out of your old self. Try and only do it when you have reason or desire to do so. Leave some things open-ended. I certainly have an idea as to where steel hearts came from. There might be a sprinkling of truth in every person's answer, though. It's open-ended. As an alternative, I'll feed you a little tidbit from my previous world where we had similar artificial life. In these instances, they were known as soul-forged. Think a lot more visibly person-oriented individuals, so your plain doll from Bloodborne would be a great example, but you had Lord Meyer, who became known later as the god of time and invention, Krona. In his mortal life, he was a brilliant inventor, but he attained power and realized that those around him were starting to age, even as he was no longer. As he started to see those pass on, he created copies of them, a world all his own, trapped in his divine realm. After he lost his wife to illness, he continued to not age, and then he made their daughter the first and proper soul-forged. There were other constructs in this realm, many who might be believed to be sophisticated, that were people disguised in general, people like states with hair and flesh tones and all of that, but the only one who was truly soul-bound was the first soul-forged, Clara Meyer. That's enough origins. Let's talk a little bit more on the interesting world-building element Steelheart. Do you know how expensive a full plate of armor is? If you play a fighter or paladin, I'm sure you're very aware of the grossly exorbitant amount of extra armor class usually offers up to you. Well, what if we had to make the organs and systems inside of the full plate armor? The creation of the birth of Steelhearts would be an incredibly expensive one. There are a few points that can refer back to elements of the Machines in Fantasy video. Clones in Star Wars were much more expensive and a better quality than battle droids. The battle droids were typically cheaply made, generally of poor quality. Now, where do Steelhearts fall in this great landscape of creation? The right answer is, yeah, there would be a range. I'm imagining for Steelhearts, there would be a diverse group of artificial life, cheaply made, though simple machines that could be used for simple, repetitive tasks. Then you would have your more expensive, capable, different plex actions, artisans of their craft. But with either of these, whether you have cheap and mass or few and expensive, there are only those caused by an abundance of wealth. So what else comes with that? There's an expensive starting point, but what comes to mind? The men and women woven of metal require a lot of metal to be made. I've seen cool stone and wood artificial life, and it tracks that with everything I'm laying out in this video, those would still be acceptable and viewed as accepted Steelhearts. However, the metal in itself is an interesting conversation. It could be expensive to buy in bulk, it could be expensive to build and create a mine. Perhaps you create Steelhearts to mine into a mountain in order to mine out more ores to then make more Steelhearts. Then you run into the hurdles that only being a finite amount of metal within whatever sphere of space your game plays on. But perhaps that isn't entirely true either, is it? Maybe these creators of Steelhearts indulge into some transmutation, magically altering and changing other more available raw materials into metal required for the creation of Steelheart. Or in the interesting thought of a Steelheart that can alter and transmute their own body, since it's made of a material that isn't flesh. Beyond all of this, think about the implications of certain metals. Usually in fantasy, you can see gold to be a very magically intuitive metal. You can see in their name, Steelhearts, you have steel as a mixture of different metals, and the implication of being able to mix those and create them in mass. Perhaps different Steelhearts have different casings, one's forged for war made out of a sturdier, heavier, more armor-like metal, while those who might be simple laborers might not be as sturdy, but built functional within the capacity of their artificial life. There's interesting creative design for numerous types of metals. If you spend any amount of time either looking up fantasy metals, adamantine, meteorite, mithril, any listed or beyond these, or heck, have fun, make up your own metals. It's something I've always wanted to do, and something I will eventually do whenever I get to my rocks and ores and metals hyperfixation that I'm sure is right around the bend from the ecology one that still has its teeth in me. What's the different metals we use for different things? What metals do we use for medical devices? Metals that we use to hammer down presses in factories? What metals do we use for cars versus planes? What do we do for infrastructure? Where do all of these differences come from? On top of this, a few different properties that I would want to spend some time thinking of. First up, the morbid option, and I've unfortunately come to the realization, or perhaps fortunately, that I tend to think of the very negative and corrupt implications of world building. However, I am hopeful that for the most part, they come from a place of liking to come up with the ultimate despair to then have it overcome by the ultimate hope. The darkest darkness makes for the brightest dawn type of stuff. Perhaps if a steel heart is destroyed or damaged in an incident, what's keeping a greedy, selfish villain from piecing together another steel heart made out of the spare parts to save money and metal? Well, that's what would be called a steel heart chimera. As for their bodies are, in part, their souls, their essence. They exist in their part. If you combine the spare parts of and disrespect the graveyards of steel hearts, their bodies come together as a vengeful spirit. Think of this to be applicable even if you have simple steel hearts of design who don't have too much critical thinking or independent thought. Ones who, to a common man, might be borderline sentient. Perhaps you even just have the soulless golems who go around the battlefield collecting parts to be melted down. There would probably be numerous ominous stories throughout of greedy barons or businessmen who collected in mass steel heart bodies stained with blood and demons torn apart, melted them down in their factories only to be met with some monstrosity tearing apart their factories and then coming after them. This isn't necessarily because those steel hearts were evil or vengeful, but because their souls are still so new that not all of them have found an easy way of attaining an afterlife. So plenty of them are trapped within their bodies, and now that has implications. Maybe steel hearts can be repaired and be brought back to life a little easier than a proper creation race, who just dies and begins to decay. That creates the steel heart chimera. This monstrous creature can be used as a narrative device to perhaps expose a party to a corrupt business individual, whether it be someone who has mines, someone who makes soldiers, or whatever it may be. But what else does this bring up? If you don't use the bodies without great detriment to yourself in some way, what happens to the metal that's just littering the battlefield? What happens to the bodies that, even if you bury them underground, they won't decompose? Well, perhaps makes an increase of a certain type of monster that makes a habit of consuming metal. Scavengers by every ecological label. At this point, though, typically the consumption of metal would not fall into that. It now would be a far more part of an environment, since metal is directly tied to something that is now deemed living, though a discussion as to creation races and then in turn humans being part of any ecological food web isn't something that comes up because typically civilization and natural environments intuitively contradict one another, but that's definitely a discussion for another video. Though a Steelheart's ecological footprint could be something interesting to debate, as it is a living creature, not something that consumes traditional energy and releases traditional energy. However, its relationship to a rust monster does, in fact. It makes it a part of a general food chain of sorts. Things that eat the rust monster would rely on the Steelhearts to keep them nice and healthy and plump and available. Perhaps the rust monsters even develop and grow over decades, centuries, millennia of Steelhearts being around. So long as you know the world and they survive throughout this time, but it is something to keep in mind. Something that would be a much more natural decomposition of various abilities and various states of being for Steelhearts, perhaps. Steelhearts would even keep them available and well-fed as a burial rite amongst their own kind. They would feed them the broken parts as they might get worn down and need to be replaced, or perhaps they'd feed the passed away parts of their family members, their friends, or whatever it is to a rust monster in order to ensure that the body is allowed to pass on, thus maybe helping the soul pass as well, and keeping the general Steelheart chimeras to a minimum. Now, what other world-building implications are there? Of course, this leads to an era of industrialization. It's been a recent realization of mine, which I guess I happen to have a lot of them in this video, but I'm a particular fan of a bit of techno-fantasy, this weird liminal period between having technology advancements and due to magic, but flirting with a medieval aesthetic and vibe. I won't tell you that steampunk and those kinds of things are a hard no for me, I just don't think I'd want that to be a universal label on my world. Maybe not quite as far as I still like my sword and sorcery and dragons, but think about how magic would just evolve lifestyles and civilizations in a historical sense. Does certainly interest me. In general, for us to have numerous machines involved, there would have to be industrialization. There's no way of generating that many bodies that quickly, that involved, that sophisticated, without it being a divine act or mass creation. Assembly lines changed everything in human history, and technology follows that. So you very easily could see this mass-scale production just like the printing press did. All sorts of modern technology could be inserted. Similarly, the implications those are that it advances your world. It causes breakthroughs because you then make steel hearts. You would have these options to generate living beings, not indefinitely because resources and time will always play a part, but in fact you'd be able to establish that this technology would just never stop here. There will be more. There will be those who create, those who design, those who thrive. But beyond industrialization of a world, there would need to be a conversation on the different kinds of steelheart. Now, simply, Warforged, it's in the name. There's nothing too complex here. It's well established that Warforged were, in fact, last I checked, forged for war. In fact, I find myself a lot more interested in being inspired to take a deep-looking gander towards the expansive universe of Star Wars and all their different kinds of droids, machines, and robots they have available. Beyond that, just fit them into your world and my fantasy. So you would have laborers, very stocky standard. You see my video on necromancy and see the ethical implications of it, as to how the undead can be used to benefit society. Depending on the way you want to spin that argument, laborers' steelhearts sort of fit the exact same niche, but would probably be more expensive, possibly more efficient and sophisticated. Building projects, farm assisting, mining, anything and everything that this body, which may not be experiencing natural fatigue or need to sleep in the same ways, may not feel exhaustion in the same ways, could be used for in place to supplement other creation races. This comes back to that conversation, as I said, I had in Necromancers, that this also offers the opportunity for dangerous work that might be lethal to something that has to breathe in oxygen to live, could be more ethically and safely designated to people who don't have such weaknesses. Now, if mines collapsing is a regular routine thing, that would still kill steelhearts and is still dangerous work. However, if it's just breathing in the coal dust, well, maybe it's better suited for that. And make no mistake, because there would be soldiers present. Those created for war steelhearts are capable of doing great siege soldiers. Able to weather climates better than other creation races, they're highly efficient soldiers. Again, there's that not needing to sleep or being able to do predictable sleep, maybe just some routine maintenance. They are, and quite literally can be designed for specific designations in war. Having hardier outer shells than your enemy might have plate mail, have hands and knuckles that can be used as such to be a maul or some way of shredding through armor, have the general ability to make one's body a weapon in itself, to make oneself a war machine. Beyond those two, I guess the most predictable and common, you would even have surgeons and caretakers programmed with information within their minds as medical practices. They would be very adept at being able to administer first aid and that kind of calculated, efficient medical practitioner on the battlefield, or even brought to a small town in order to attend to things when either maybe a doctor's sick or maybe the church is unavailable to heal it up. I think you would see a lot of specialized precision because you might have steelhearts that are able to become more efficient. Surgeons performing those great operations able to repair injuries because of the nature that they don't have shaky hands. They very likely may not be unsettled by blood or bile in any of these things. Not to say you can't explore what it would be like to be a steelheart who does experience discomfort with blood, and that could be a very either comedic character to play or give them a traumatized reason as to why they fear the warm ichor of human life upon their plate. I think you'd see, beyond that morbid description, natural caretakers of steelhearts. These guardians throughout media, it's very easy for you to see a loyal butler or caretaker, your Alfred Pennyworths, if you will, who are able to just play this parental role. Through that, butler robots are only a shade or two away. Beyond this, you'd have babysitters, and you can find a nurse, and those who take care of children or vulnerable children. I know I'd keep referring back to it, but in Star Wars, I forget the name of it. If I can remember to look it up, I'll throw it up on screen, but Star Wars literally has a caretaker droid that they're meant to take care of the needs of the child, to be nurturing, soothing, patient with it, but they are bodyguard levels of fighting capabilities and armor to where they can defend the child should a need present itself. Additionally, you have the potential to do something very interesting, where I mentioned wood and stone as unconventional materials to steelheart creation. Keep in mind, the sky is the limit. Between Magwife and myself, we designed, well, they would have just been called Warforged back in the day, but artificial life characters, one of which named Pippa. She was essentially bought and custom made in order to be a sentient stuffed animal of sorts to take care of young children. She has a very soft, plush outer material. She was made to be viewed as kinder, sweeter, and more docile in nature. Less, again, warrior of steel aesthetic. So that's great diversity in how how you design the characters you create, because there are so many different roles and so many different options. If there's a job that can be done, you can think, okay, how would someone most efficiently be designed to do that? Minor Steelhearts would likely be smaller in stature, so they don't have to dig as deep and have to be standing as tall as to fit in caverns as they mine for ores or other precious materials. They'd be lower to the ground, whereas you might have great warriors who are bigger, more soldier-like frames. Just all these different elements are things that, because of artificial creation of life, they can be up to consideration. Express your creativity in any way you want. Now, beyond the medical Steelhearts, to get us back on track, as there's only a handful of different things, I imagine, right now, you have your assassin. You might argue that some of these might be the most expensive and possibly the most morally questionable, as you will pay for soldiers to be created, but assassins have different implications. There's a bit more of a selfishness in them to use them for one's own agenda, and there's likely a lot more technique and skill that goes into making them accordingly. They have to be quiet, they have to have a sleek design that can blend into the night, they have to be able to kill without remorse or question, and doing so in an efficient and effective manner. They have to be capable of not leaving tracks or trails behind. They have to be clever enough to be able to not be caught. Next, these are things that perhaps some inventor in your world has found a way of programming into a choice, metal choice, magical enchantment. They have the perfect assassin. You can think of IG-88 or 4LOM. I'm pretty certain Samurai Jack also explores the trope of created assassin robots, just all these different elements. Pretty certain Batman the Animated Series also has a similar episode they explore in having a hyper-efficient robot, and I know the comics recently had a new-ish character that was in case Batman dies, this robot activates and takes over for him, and then it ended up being evil because all of Bruce Wayne's interactions with machines almost always backfire. But beyond this, the last two are a bit unconventional, as you would have your leaders, those who are programmed to be able to lead and organize the Steelhearts. Now, this could be as a superintendent or a foreman of Steelheart factories or areas of work, given this higher level of efficiency and higher thinking to develop and drive productivity and organization. These are things I think get enhanced a lot or enforced a lot in like Lean and Six Sigma nonsense. You'd hear corporate modern mentalities go on with peoples being numbers. Then, of course, you'd have your Paragon leader figure. Another story of Acies' technician. Initially, he created the Steelhearts to be created whether his hands were directly in it or not. Again, part of the uncertain origin story, but he certainly allowed them to thrive with soul. He eventually grew quite ill and tired from seeing them be used and abused and discarded. Just like he knew was precious and unique that just got abused. Frankly, he developed an avatar of himself within the world known as Technotron. Technotron would be a leader of the Steelheart. He drove for mass creation, mass enchantment, and the liberties and freedoms for creation races to view Steelhearts just like themselves. For he was an advocate for his brethren, even though the frustrating ones who thought that they wanted to be in service and that they were content and happy in their lives. He still fought for them to have good, safe working conditions, fought for them to understand their autonomy, their life, their desires. The last group we'd see as an unofficial group called Steelkin, but take that as a placeholder name, as converted creation races into Steelhearts, who have had parts of their bodies replicated. Anyone with amputations, and then you have a mechanical arm, or perhaps you wholly changed your body in an attempt to attain immortality of some sort with a mechanical presence. Though you started as a lowly elf with that, you would have been viewed as one of the family, but not directly a Steelheart, because at some point, in part, your body is still made of, or was made of, flesh. But you have the will of iron, the will of an efficient life. I think it'd be worth looking at because it's something I didn't do with the Leyland and Shahar, my elves that I recreated, which if you hadn't seen, I'm still pretty proud of those two groups that I came up with. Magwife did some excellent art for that. Let's talk a bit more about the physical details, though funnily enough, I start this on a species that kind of breaks most of those rules. So for weight, well, you're going to be heavier than most other creation races because you're literally made of metal. Most of them have, in time, even your lighter metals, you're still talking about replacing tissue with tinfoil. You're still going to have weight aplenty, probably going to be heavier than bones and flesh and all of that, which, random creative idea, well, okay, let me get to where I mention it and then I'll follow back up with said idea, so don't let me forget, okay? So, as far as height, it's a range, almost an indefinite range as far as things can be built. Depending on your model or design, you can have anything deemed as a Steelheart Steelheart. That just depends if there's a soul bound to the machine. It could be stuff as small as R2-D2 or fresh cut grass, to beings as large as Mechagodzilla, the Iron Giant, or Gurren Lagann. The idea, I guess, that stuck to me is as I was doing the initial audio recording of this, is what if there was some great villain or king that was dug back up from the earth itself, from its burial ground, just bones at this point as a grounding force used, almost like Kiryu was the third Mechagodzilla, something similar to what they do to Metal Cooler or Mecha Frieza and all that. Just this interesting thought I had, as they would still be deemed as Steelheart, Steelkin, technically speaking, but the idea of receiving someone, giving them a metal body as a revival method, some new arcane form of pseudo-lichdom almost. I don't know, just seemed cool to me, I guess. I might explore that later. As far as age, if elves can live into numerous centuries, a Steelheart is nothing but the sum of their parts. Their own iron will, if you will, they can live into an abundance of years, possibly outliving elves with proper maintenance and avoiding premature death through dangerous lives. If they replace the failing parts, they just add on time. Similar to how you can have cars that, if you do proper maintenance and restore and replace the bad parts, you can be driving old antique cars on the road. Just as anything else, you might have the argument that newer models might be more efficient, might be sturdier, more dangerous, but you can definitely have to acknowledge something so old, so eternal, has a level of wisdom and authority with it. As far as where they might live, it's where they're needed. Some live in the service and acceptance in their hearts, but largely wherever a Steelheart is created to exist is where it thrives the most. A Steelheart made to be a soldier will thrive the most on the battlefield. Those meant to explore dangerous environments would thrive in those dangerous environments, wherever their bodies are made to adapt and overcome. Medical ones would thrive, in the most part, in that capacity where they're needed. As far as class ideas, I've been running through a little elements to throw in. As far as paladins and warlocks, which for those unaware are my two favorite classes, instead of pacts and oaths, maybe you're given prime directives or terms and conditions that you have to agree to. Things that can cause your character conflict or misunderstandings. Again, watch the RoboCop movies if you need to know where prime directives can become a questionable idea with an abundance of storytelling. Depending on who makes you, who artifices you, depending on who makes you or who you have as artificers. If you have Pointy Hat, Witch Lich at the forefront of your mind as often as I do, you can have a Steelheart who seeks immortality through a forever changing and improving body and lifestyle. As far as others, it's something I've not yet explored or gone into a great deep dive in explaining on the channel, but I break down classes into different groups. Classes in your fighter, barbarian, paladin, not socioeconomic classes, but how would I change them up and label them? A video for a different day, but what's relevant now is your ranger, your bard, your rogue. Those would be under the label as talent. These are, as far as Steelhearts care, specialized creation. These beings would be made and adapted from the forge itself to be the best possible setup for set. Now, with any of these, I want you to know, and I want other players to explore deviations from a huge theme in the previous video, as well as a theme with Steelhearts, as being handed life instructions and then pulling the Miles Morales and saying, nah, what if I go my own way? As we move on to NPCs, consider Technician is my god of artifice. He sees the pride and joy of Steelhearts, seeing them created in proper life, not just being perfect weapons, they're a perfect invention. They are a life form that can strive and be understood. From Technician comes Technotron, the savior of the Steelhearts. Created as Technician fell into a great despair, he wants to help correct the sins of the other creation races in Everlasting. He would go to war for his people if he feels they are wronged, but he would be their champion, their leader. Despite everything, these last two, while there are NPCs with names and very specific stories being created in the back of my mind for these roles, I want to keep them general and broad, as the presentation to you guys is more about keeping your options open and less one individual NPC that you can or cannot swipe if you want to. So you would want to look at two different types of creators. You have your ethical creators, so true artisan who believed Steelhearts were an advancement of enduring spirit of the world, a new generation of life, and they were created with a sincere view of found family or a found child. Beyond that, there are a lot of loving tinkerers and technologists out there in fiction that you can derive inspiration from. Think of these people as some sort of first ones who see artificial life as life, not just a machine, not just a service or product. And then of course you have your unethical misers, your sheriff of Nottingham types, the greed-ridden pigs who make them cheaply to cheat as many people and gain as much money as possible. These are your antagonists, certainly. The ones most likely to bring Steelheart chimeras into the mix. Those who would use and abuse flesh-ridden creatures, but they think perhaps these wind-up soldiers are much more easy to attain, generate, and abuse as they're new to this world. Do they have rights? Do they have protections? These are your villains. There are boundless possibilities for other NPCs, other stories and implications. For now, I think those are my Steelheart. Hopefully they've offered a wealth of options for you, different perspective on what you might want to do with your artificial life, but I think with Regenesis Acies, it is going to be hard for me to just throw numerous ideas at you all and not connect them, so perhaps your books will state that the races known as Everlastings were the first life forms of thought and action to wander Aces. While recording each culture to themselves as the first, it is of no consequence what the reality of this dilemma is in regard to the truth of the matter. As they are all wrong, there was an interaction with, one recorded in no other place in history, but personal journal of the Leyland king, Agni Masudara. When I was out hunting, I found that time is not measured in days and years, but in the passing of crops. Today was admittedly a bit different. I was attacked by a strange being, one who stood and moved and fought like the creation races of the crown. However, with my eyes, I knew he was no Shaharan sat. He bore no fangs to be a vampire or any other creation bold enough to encroach upon our territory. It was truly a mystery. He was strong enough to properly dent, though even to me it was strange. Ever since I've become a practitioner of the eyes of reality, see life forms in a different way. I perceive things. I felt that. Today is one I shall see for quite time. In this warrior, they were engineered of pure quintessence bound into a suit of armor. He seemed to have one purpose in life, to fight, kill, and conquer. He was not a creation race, not one I have ever seen, and yet, so similar to everyone, my eyes, he moved through the world with function and nothing else. There was no reasoning, no discussion. It reminded me of battling the Gigant World Cutter, then dancing with those of us that walk the land, and build and fight. Perhaps there are those shaped like elf and man, but exist much more like the Gigant. I hope you guys enjoyed the Steelhearts. I don't know who exactly will be next as far as the Regenesis Acies series. I have a few ideas, but for the most part, I've been having a lot of fun. I guess having to commit to world building as opposed to having 200 videos and ideas and world building thoughts inside my mind at any given moment. But for now, I think I should free you guys up, as you have all of my other videos to watch. So if you enjoyed this one, just leave me a comment telling me if you think a Steelheart, a Leyland, or a Shaharan would win in a fight. Or I don't know, who you main in a Marvel rival. Leave a like, hit that subscribe, join in the growing army of magpies that will one day come and steal all of the things from everyone. And beyond that, thanks again for watching. Magpie Response.